Hello and welcome everyone to the main event. I'm Meeta Sani and I am joined by our regular and esteemed guest, employment lawyer Tosh Paul-Patia. Hi,
Oh,
Tosh.
stop it, Meeta, stop it.
We are the original webinar partners, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing this for a long time, all through COVID. We were doing every week at one point. So it was, and I think we helped a lot of people. And that was the idea. People were struggling at that time and they just needed some direction on certain things. So that was certainly the feedback we had.
Yeah, and the way the main event has evolved now is that we look at what's going on out there in the world. Last week was Maternal Mental Health Week, and I've got some crazy stats that actually are part of the reason that we discussed and chose this topic. So over 75%, 77% of women feel discriminated against during their maternity process at work. I mean, how crazy is that? And to add to that stat, 11% felt that they were made to leave their role because of maternity. I mean, that's crazy. I can't quite believe it, especially because I've been advising clients for years on this, and I did my own 3 most senior people in the last 3 years. And it's not rocket science. It is a conversation. I think everyone's afraid of this conversation because of all the potential legal implications.
Yeah, and it's the reality of the situation, isn't it? The employers that embrace the situation understand about work-life balance and family and the way the world works now, not 1970. Whereas other employers who are just all about the work, well, either you can do the work or you can't. But there's laws in place now. So even if, what I often find is employees get made settlement agreement offers or severance packages when they're on maternity leave because they just want somebody to get on with the job and just get on with it. So maybe they're not the right employers, but there are laws to protect people and there are consequences if employers don't do the right thing in these circumstances. So I guess it comes down to me too, is whether companies are prepared to pay the consequences just to get somebody who's going to be doing the work rather than going on maternity leave, right?
Well, from my perspective, it's the holistic approach. Like, we've got you here you don't just know the legalities, you also are a great employer and you support your people and all the rest of it as well. But there is the business element. So we're going to cover the fact that we're dealing with people going on the best journey of their life whilst wanting to hold down their job and have great prospects and retain their position in their business, but also considering what the employer has to deal with, which is the upheaval. And we're not saying it's a good or bad thing, but it is a shift where they need to think about who else to hire. They've got to think about the impact on the rest of the business. And so there is a 3-prong attack, if you like, or approach to this process and the impact it might have. So today's session, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the detail. It's about 45 minutes. We know everyone's time is very precious and we try to keep our sessions succinct. They will be recorded, so you can watch them again. You can share them with people in your organization that you think might benefit from it. And please interact with us, ask questions, tell us about your challenges. We've got a few ways you can do that. So we've got a chat box here, which is really easy to interact with. So I've just put a hello there. Hopefully you can see that there. Please give us your thoughts and questions. And we've got a poll today. So the poll today is asking what area of your maternity support package doesn't work seamlessly. So we've got the initial conversation, and when that person initially comes to you and says, hey, I'm pregnant, and you think, right, what needs to be done from here? Or it's the package. So do you have a package? Do you have an enhanced package? Is it the statutory? How, what level are they? All of that. How are you managing that conversation? Because again, I think employers can be afraid of having a general conversation around that, Tosh. So we can help with that.
So and then, we're going to cover all of that. And also, one thing you just said there about, be interactive with us, be more than that. If you've got some frustrations and some specific questions or situations you're dealing with right now, please put them in the chat. You've got 2 experts here that will be able to help you and deal with probably any kind of problem you've got there. Or if it's a bit complex, we can even take it offline. So please do use this for its purposes, which is, give us a good grilling so we can, help you with whatever you're dealing with, right? Or whatever questions you have.
You've got free employment law expertise at your fingertips, so utilize it. And I will be too. I tell you what, Tosh, the next one is about the keep in touch process.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting because I think that in our world, we have absolutely got it down, and we'll be going into detail of what the keep in touch process needs to be legally, but also what you can do as an employer to keep your employee feeling connected to your world. But it's not a given because, again, it's different strokes for different folks. Different employees want something different. So you can bespoke this. You've got your legal obligations and then you've got your human obligations. And you can agree that with each employee on an individual basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's important to have the human bespoke way because some people say, look, leave me alone. And some people want to be, they feel left out if they don't go to an office and you assume that they won't come or don't. Just treat them the way they would be if they were there.
Yeah, exactly. So despite you might have the perfect support structure and the right maternity package, it's not a one size fits all. And I think assuming that's the case could land you in some challenging, even though you think you've done all the thinking towards it. And then the final element is that return to work plan. So actually thinking about, because you can't ask the question, right? You can't ask the question, when do you plan to return to work? Is that right, Tosh?
No, you can ask the question. There's no issue with that at all because it should happen by default. In fact, Mita, right? Because we're going to talk about the period of maternity leave. So there's a date that the person is supposed to return, and that should all be confirmed when they go on leave in the first place. If they're going to take a year off or less than that, that discussion should take place beforehand. No problem with that. Obviously, you have to run your business, don't you?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to.
It's also for employers, Mita, lots of these things that, I'm telling employees what their rights are and so forth, but employers also have rights and they can also have grown-up conversations with their employees, as tricky as they might feel or awkward. What do you do with an employee that is going off on sickness absence when they're whilst pregnant? Can you talk about it? Is it because of the pregnancy? Does she go on sick leave? Do we force her to go on mat leave? All sorts of different types of scenarios that people just don't know what to do. But you can have a straight conversation with them and then make a sensible decision. So it's not the employee that determines everything. It's the employer that determines what they want to do about it, whether lawful or not. So it's just about understanding what your rules are, right? And what your compass is, so to speak.
And that's why I think this session is going to be very powerful because it is bringing all elements of that approach together and understanding what is the best approach. And then, of course, if somebody's going, let's think about covering that role. Is it going to be an internal division of duties? If you're hiring, we get a lot of maternity mandates. Somebody's going off on maternity. We need this much. We need these skills. You don't always need the same skills of the role for a maternity cover. Employers don't think about that sometimes because some of their role is longer term. Actually a 9 or 12 month covering the basics could be very different. So we can talk about that, how to best cover and how to best recruit for maternity cover. And then the final question was flexible working requests, because again, there is an element of where people, when they come back from maternity, may want to ask for flexible working support.
The majority, in fact.
The majority.
You've got a baby now, so how are we going to accommodate that? And also, you should enjoy that, having that child, and spending more time at home or what have you. But it isn't just for childcare, as we'll get to in a moment. It used to be. Flexible working can be for anybody, for any reason whatsoever, because they feel like it. So we'll get into that as well.
Okay. Well, we've got a real range of responses. If you haven't responded, please put your thoughts on the poll. That's very interesting, and it will allow us to tailor the conversation to that as well. And then we can start to get into the nitty gritty. Well, hopefully we've got some people out there. Give us a little hello in the chat box if you're there and you can hear us and we know we're talking to someone and not just to each other. And that's not for you, Tosh. I know you're there.
No, I was tempted.
I know, I can see it. So where should we start, Tosh?
Let's start right at the beginning, which talks about, I thought we'd do a guide for maternity leave, maternity pay, and what is it that you're entitled to. Let's cover the basics.
Brilliant. And a hello to everyone there. Thank you.
We're steaming in now.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Hi, Louise. And hello, everyone else. Thank you. Right. Let's go for it, Tosh. So let's do the basics. Let's start with maternity leave and maternity pay.
So everybody's entitled to maternity leave from day one of employment. Okay, everybody. There's no question of it. So it doesn't matter what your length of service is, whatever, everybody's entitled to it. So that's an easy one. The issue is whether you're entitled to maternity pay during that period. So to be entitled to maternity pay, you've got to have been an employee there for at least 26 weeks, so 6 months. And that 6 months has to end the 15th week before the baby is due. Don't ask me why. That's the thing. So that's 6 months and it's 15 weeks before the baby's due at the very latest. Okay, that's to be entitled to maternity pay. To receive maternity pay, that means you're automatically eligible for it. So no matter what, as long as you meet that criteria, you will be eligible for maternity pay and maternity leave. Right? We'll talk about people being made redundant on maternity leave as well. I'll cover that as well. So it's really a matter of ticking some boxes. You're either eligible or you're not. Assuming you're eligible, it's the first 6 months is called maternity leave, and the remaining 6 months is called additional maternity leave. So basically, employees can take up to 1 year off, right? 52 weeks. The first 6 weeks, I got the other way around, is 90% of the person's average earnings. Yeah. And the remaining 33 weeks, so it's only a 39-week period that's covered for maternity pay, is presently at £172.48 a week, or your salary, if it's 90% of your salary, if it's lower than that figure, okay, whichever's the lower. Yeah. Okay. So that means essentially 39 weeks are paid that way, and the other 13 weeks to make up 52 weeks is unpaid, right? Yeah. There's also
that's the statutory.
Correct. That's the statutory. So anything else in terms of money, if it's enhancement that an employer offers, obviously that will be separate. If it's in a policy, then it's a contractual entitlement and therefore law. If it's not, that's what the legal minimum is.
Okay. Now, what do you know? I haven't got statistics for how many. I should have looked this up actually.
You're the stats person.
I know, I'm the stats person. It'd be interesting to, if anyone in the room actually knows that, how many companies offer enhanced over basic maternity packages. I think it's a high percentage, because actually a lot of employers can have statutory maternity cover as standard, but have the conversation with individuals. Is that right, Tosh? Is that fair?
The difficulty with that is, why would I give enhanced maternity pay to one person but not another? Then you're looking at a difference in treatment. If there's inconsistency of treatment, that could give rise to other problems, right? Could even give rise to a constructive dismissal claim if it's something to do with pay. Well, why are you not letting me be paid? You're giving that person. Yeah. It's one or the other. They don't use their discretion for that. They might. That's different. And you crash over somebody who's got the flu. I don't know. I'm just making that up. But you know, it's a differential that can be explained, right?
So Louise has just come back with some stats. Thank you, Louise.
Yeah, interesting.
80% of companies offer enhanced maternity paternity, and on Mercer it says 67% offered. Thank you, Louise. Actually, Louise and I had a little conversation. Well, not conversation on LinkedIn messaging, but Louise mentioned that her thinking around maternity is that people shouldn't feel under pressure to come back too early, because actually that can then often put them under strain from mental health and taking care of their family, and they may come back to work because financially they can't afford to, but they then feel the pressure of leaving their family too soon, and what you end up getting is a dejected, unhappy employee who may be susceptible to more postnatal depression, and ultimately may leave because they just don't feel that they've had the right support and that they can't sustain what they're doing in their organization. So, and Louise, if I got that wrong, just drop it in the chat box what you were saying. But yeah, so it's quite interesting that actually investing by offering an enhanced package will reflect in retention rates.
My experience is slightly different, not your point about retention rates, but that people that generally employees do not feel the pressure to come back to work early. There is either a conversation where there's an exit for whatever reason, or the conversation that's a challenge is returning to work on different terms, flexible working. Because the right to going when you go on maternity leave is to come back to the same job, same terms and conditions. So if you're full-time, you're full-time. And then they ask for a flexible working, and then they have to look at ways that they can accommodate that request, right? So that's really, I think, where the challenge is, rather than feeling pressure to come back in. There's also something that we touched on earlier, keeping in touch days. So keeping in touch days are 10 days where employees can, if they wish to, by an agreement between the employer and the employee can come back to work, and they can get full pay. It doesn't extend or disrupt the maternity leave. Maternity pay is all included in that, but it isn't more than 10 days. If you do more than 10 days,
is that 10 days in a 52-week period or a 39-week period?
52.
Yeah, and it's 10 paid days. And if they choose to do more than the 10 days, it would be unpaid. Is that right?
No, if you choose to do more than 10 keeping in touch days, your maternity leave automatically ends.
That's what I mean by unpaid.
No,
your maternity leave ends.
Come back to work.
Right. So actually, employees should be very careful about doing more than 10 keep in touch days.
The idea is, it's a little bit like holiday meter. The idea of holiday isn't to get the money, it's to take the leave from work, to get a break, to get a rest break.
Yeah.
Maternity leave is there not to just come dip in and out. It's keeping in touch days. It's in the name, right? But
did you say rest break for somebody on maternity?
No, I meant for holidays. I said.
Oh, I see. Okay, because I was going to say those two words aren't in the same.
No, I'll say that holiday, people don't get the money for holiday apart from on termination of their employment. They get the holiday entitlement because you're supposed to get a rest break. So the analogy being here, you're going on maternity leave to look at, to have a baby, and have that first year or whatever time you want. But sometimes, very rarely, if the employees don't wish to do that and they want to come back early, put baby in nursery or childcare or what have you, and then come back to work early. But very rarely in my experience.
Okay. So if an employer was only offering statutory and is thinking and looking at their return to work attrition rates, they could consider offering an standard enhanced, but then could they have different packages for different types of roles? So if there's a sales role versus an admin role versus a director role, would that be seen as discriminatory?
No, I think that would be absolutely right. They could do that because there's a different value that people bring to the workplace. It's just the reality of the scenario. So a CEO of a company that might go on maternity leave, there's likely to be a package that will encourage them to stay and come back and what have you. That might be one of the terms that they're joining on. Whereas if it's somebody at a lower level, they don't mind that as much, in which case they won't get that package. So you can differentiate as long as it's not discriminatory. That's always the point, isn't it? And if you're differentiating, as long as the inconsistency of treatment is valid.
Yeah, you always come back to business case. I remember in all of our conversations and wherever there's all of our webinars and wherever there's a conversation around, can I have that conversation, Tosh? Like, am I allowed to say that? And you always say, if you're making your business case, in fact, you should always make your business case, because that's what a manager or an owner of a business is representing, right? A people leader absolutely holds the position of the business. So all their decisions are based on business reasons, and they should, as clearly as possible, when having these conversations, make that business case.
Absolutely.
Maternity.
I would say probably 100%, maybe I'd say 99% of the situations that are problematic that we deal with is because the why something is happening has not been explained or understood between the two of them. And if you think about it, it's why that matters all day long, right? If I murder somebody, if I kill someone, you think I'm a murderer, right? Now, suppose it was in self-defense because I had to protect my wife and kids. Well, now I'm not a murderer. My why changed everything. So that horrible example, I don't know why I use that.
Yeah, interesting analogy, but I get it. Yeah,
but you see my point. So if you explain, look, this is why we're doing this. This is the way that we're operating, and unfortunately, this is what the scenario is. Then that's fine. So whatever your challenging conversation at work is from an employer's point of view, be very clear with your why. Otherwise, internal dialogue kicks in. And you start thinking other things are happening or something else is behind the agenda.
You can make assumptions, and so if you don't fill the space, somebody will fill the space with their own thoughts. So that's interesting. So why don't we start from the beginning, Tosh?
Correct.
So there's a little time lag, and I'm having a little bit of tech challenge with you, Tosh. So I hope, can you see me all right? Is my flow okay? Okay. Just while we're getting Tosh Josh, I'm having a little technical challenge with your feed. It's a little stop.
It's fine now, it's come back.
Fine, good. Just before we jump into, I was going to say, let's take the process. Let's start from the timeline and let's just walk through it all, the legalities, the conversations, the strategies that we recommend. And hopefully we'll cover the areas that we said we would look at in our invite, which included maternity leave and pay, which we've covered. I don't think we've actually mentioned the amount of pay that people get as statutory, Tosh. What is that number right now?
Yeah, it's 172. So the first 6 weeks is 90% of your average
you
earnings.
That.
And the remaining 33 weeks at present, and it changes every year, is £172.48 a week, unless your salary is lower than that, in which case it's that.
Fine.
It's also important that you give your employer a MAP-B1 form, which you can only get after 20 weeks of being pregnant from your midwife or doctor.
Okay. So 20 weeks is the point at which people will start telling you about what's going on.
Yeah, that's what it should do. And obviously, sometimes people, they don't even know they're pregnant, right? And then they just suddenly have a baby. And then maternity leave starts from the moment the baby's born. You have to take compulsory maternity leave, which is 2 weeks from when the baby's born, no matter what. Yeah. But yes, otherwise you can get a MAP-B1 form and you can get that after 20 weeks of pregnancy.
Okay. Right. Just before we go into the process and break it down into different areas, Louise actually gave me her insights. So Louise said that the research and studies she found was that colleagues felt pressure to come back when companies only offered statutory pay because they financially could not sustain their family. So they felt they needed to come back earlier. So I think that's where the pressure to come back early would be an impact when they can't financially afford to. The knock-on effect would be that people came back too early, didn't feel fully supported, felt the pressure of being a parent and sustaining work life and all the rest of it, and might be why there's high levels of attrition in maternity. Thank you for that, Lou. So let's start with...
It does make sense.
So in terms of somebody letting an employer know, their obligation is to let the employer know by when, Tosh? When is that date?
Well, the reality is, as I was saying, there's situations where people don't even know they're pregnant. So right. So they let them know as soon as the baby's born. But in reality, you can take maternity leave 11 weeks before the due date.
Yeah.
So the reality is it comes down to when the employee wants to take the maternity leave, right?
Yeah.
Then the employee will ask for the MAP-B1 form and all the rest of it.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that if somebody wants to retain their role and be part of the organization, they're going to bring the conversation up. They might be part of the handover and the hiring of the person that's going to replace them. Yes, they will give indications of, hey, I want a year. And I think with all of my people that I've had dealt with a lot of maternities over the years, it's always been an open conversation of, we want you to have the best maternity experience whilst remaining employed by us. Let's look at the different elements of what we need to talk about to ensure that happens. Is that?
Yep, absolutely. And what should normally happen is once the discussion's been had, once the maternity leave's been agreed, you then set it all out in a letter, because you know what? Everybody's going to forget, because you're just going to get on with what you're going to get on with until it comes for the time to come back to work. And that's where the employees have now got used to not being at work, and perhaps they want to then change or adjust the way that they work going back to work.
Yeah,
we'll get to that in a minute. Also, people on maternity leave or pregnant employees have higher rights than people who don't. So, for example, if there's a redundancy situation, I'm not saying you can't make a pregnant person redundant, but that they would have preference depending on skill sets and so forth, right? If there was a situation, because they've got the right to return to the same job,
right?
Unless obviously that job doesn't exist. But if there's a redundancy scenario and the right to the same job, and let's say there's 5 people doing that job and now we only need 3. Well, that pregnant person shouldn't be in that pool.
Right. Interesting. So actually they're protected is what we're saying.
Correct. Yeah. So it's got to be, once your eligibility kicks in and you're entitled to maternity pay or what have you, then you would be, and if you are genuinely made redundant because the company is closed down completely, for example, they still get all their maternity pay and redundancy entitlements and everything else. Once it's triggered, it's triggered.
Okay. Well, 14% of our attendees today said that initial conversations, timing and right is the area that they feel needs some help. Louise, you're asking about fixed term contract. Are you asking about if somebody who works for you is on a fixed term contract. Let's assume that that's what you're saying. So somebody's employed on a fixed term contract, the legalities don't change, do they, Tosh? So if their contract was going
Correct.
to finish whilst they were off on maternity, would there be any change in approach?
No, the triggers are the same, Mita. Once eligibility has been determined, and then it's triggered. If they're an employee, they have to be an employee. But if the contract will terminate under the terms of the contract for the fixed term anyway, then that's the case. That's the case anyway, right? So it will make no difference.
Yeah. So they get all the rights until their contract finishes.
Correct.
Yeah. But if there was maternity pay, that would still be done through the organisation until they.
So all she needs to be is an employee, 26 weeks, ending with the 15 weeks before the expected week of confinement.
Yeah.
If that is met, she gets her maternity pay.
Yeah. And we, in the main group, obviously on our talent attraction side, we recruit for permanent contract and temporary people, interim. So people that are working on a day rate or an hourly rate, but they may have been with an employer for a long period of time. And there is a period at which they are also treated as permanent employees for the purpose of maternity.
Correct.
What is that? I think it's 2 years. Am I right?
Well, 2 years is the magic number where people get employment rights, right? So the reality is, and I'll say it like this, is if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Yeah.
So no matter what you label it as, if it walks like an employee, is operating the same way, the fact that they submit invoices, if that's what they're doing, doesn't tip it in favor of a non-employee. If there's enough factors that indicate that it's an employee, then it's an employee. Fine. But if that's the issue, if we're arguing employment status, right?
Yeah. So it's being sensible and it's looking at it. And again,
Correct.
As an employer, if you've had somebody for 2 years, you want them to come back. They know you, they work for you, they've got expertise in your organization, they've got skills that are potentially irreplaceable, especially with the massive skills gap that we're dealing with in the UK and London especially. We want to hold on to people. You want it to be your choice of who works for you as an organization. Sometimes you have restructures, sometimes roles change, sometimes you have to let people go. But let's not make it that because you as an employer handled maternity badly, somebody has deselected themselves. That is avoidable. And that's what today is about, making sure you avoid that.
Yes,
and you
correct.
become an employer of choice and you stand out as an employer that supports maternity and paternity. Because I think one of the stats, again, is that very few men take on paternity leave. So shall we just talk a bit about the rights of paternity leave as well while I drink from my giant?
Is slightly different. You're entitled to up to 4 weeks paid leave, a cap to the statutory amount. I think it's shared parental leave that people should be more aware of. Shared parental leave now is the mother can stop her maternity leave, and the rest and the remainder of her leave, whatever is left over, can be shared flexibly with the partner.
And I understand it's a 6 month each, or is it?
It can be whatever it is. It can be whatever it is. So if the employee says, right, you know what, I want to take the first 6 weeks off of maternity leave, then after that, I'd like to work. I'd like to share it with my husband. So we'll split it between us. So I might be taking this period of time or that period of time. You just got to map it out and plan it with the employer, because the employer's got the right to manage their business still. Can't just decide willy-nilly when to come in or not to come in. It's got to be by agreement. It might be disruptive to do that with the business as well, right? So it's got to be something that's managed properly.
Okay. We have a question actually, so I'm just going to put that to you. If I don't meet the length of employment criteria because, say, I became pregnant shortly after changing jobs, but have been in continuous employment, although I have 2 employers, am I still qualified for SMP or only maternity allowance?
The question's a little bit complex. So let me tell you again what the requirement is. You have to be there for 6 months, so 26 weeks, ending with the 15 week before the expected week of confinement. That's it. So if
this person wouldn't have been there for 26 weeks. I think
so
that's
if you
what
hadn't been there for 26 weeks, then she would only get maternity allowance.
So maternity allowance is the 176 a week.
No, that is statutory maternity pay.
Okay.
That's what they will pay through the employer. I'd have to actually look it up what maternity allowance is. I can look it up while we're talking. So, but
Yeah.
that's a government scheme, right?
Yeah. So this is my understanding, because an employer would facilitate that. Is that right, Tosh?
Yes, correct. So what would happen is you would tell the employee that you need to fill in a form
Yes.
regarding your
Yeah.
maternity allowance. You could probably
So
download it off the internet and get it submitted that way, or they'd have to go into find out through some of the government agencies that provide the maternity allowance. I don't
yeah.
normally get involved in that side of things because it's not relevant for legal purposes, right? They might just say
No.
it says here it is. Oh, it is the same.
Yeah. I thought it
£172.48
was.
a week. You're right. It's the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
172.48 since April this year.
But one thing I would say is that even if you don't qualify for statutory maternity pay, you could potentially ask for an enhanced maternity package with your employer. You could, if you're, you may not have been there for that period of time, but that would be a bespoke package that you can have a conversation about. So,
Of course, yeah, you can agree anything you want to, Amita. It comes down to the. Oh, sorry, I think I've lost you again.
sorry guys, we're having a little tech challenge today. I hope that it isn't too challenging for people. Tosh and I must both be a little bit in and out. Can I just get a little note in the chat box if anyone is challenged with seeing us and hearing us?
You're back in sync now. You're back in sync now, Mita.
And if who is sticky for you guys, that would be great. Welcome back, Tosh. I'm doing a lot of umming today because I feel like I want to think about it as I'm talking about it, because there are so many angles. And I think that's why our poll is so broad in the areas that people are challenged about. So 25%
Yes.
have said maternity package, 25% have said keeping in touch, 37% have said return to work planning. So we'll definitely focus on that as well. And then 12% were the original one, which was the initial conversation and timing.
Yeah. Return to work is the one that, in my experience, is the biggest issue.
Okay.
Most people don't have an issue with the rest of it.
Okay.
From a legal perspective.
Looks like it's just me and you, because Delia said no challenge on their end. So that's good. Fingers crossed. We'll keep going. So let's talk about whilst people are off, because you're absolutely right. You can have all the best intentions. You've got your 10 keep in touch days, and somebody can say, oh, I felt really disconnected and I don't feel like enough was given to me whilst I was off. So, for example, you can agree to keep in touch with them on their personal email, or can you keep their work email going? Like, would there be a comeback of, oh, they're being too intrusive on the other end? Like, what sort of engagement would an employer keep up with their employees?
It's whatever's agreed, right, between you and the employee. And in reality, why would you be contacting them? I wouldn't do a work email, generally speaking, because then they'll see all their work emails and might get stressed about it, even though you're covering it. So you would agree. And what are you emailing them about anyway? So the reality would be you agree what the lines of communication are, which would be the phone, presumably. And why are you calling them? Presumably to see how they are, just checking what's going on, or perhaps as you're approaching a few months before they're due to come back, just checking in, what's going on, how are you? Are you looking to come back on the same terms, or are you looking for anything else because you've had baby? Nothing wrong with those sensible conversations, right?
Yeah. And you would invite them to a company day out or Christmas dinner. That all continues, because it's their choice. They don't have to come, but don't forget to do that, because I do think sometimes employers, that can slip through the net.
Absolutely. Employers do forget to do that. So absolutely right. They should be asked for those things. The employee might even say, well, I just had the baby. Why would I come? But it's about being inclusive.
Yeah. And that's it, isn't it? It's about stepping back and actually just being human about it and thinking, what would I want if I was off on maternity? And then checking with them, like, this is how would you like to be kept in touch with?
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't press that more. I appreciate there's some complicated things to know, like there's 39 weeks and 26 weeks before the 15th week, before the expected week of confinement, and all the other complications. But the rest of it is just be decent about it. Have a grown-up conversation about it. Be clear what works, what doesn't work. So yes, absolutely, agreement all day will win.
Yeah. So before we go into the return to work planning, I would like to just talk a little bit about recruiting people. And there's always recruiting maternity cover always brings the question, when we take on maternity mandates, clients will say, oh, well, I can't hire them permanently because I don't want them to think that I'm replacing them. But actually, an employer can hire somebody permanently, regardless of whether that person then moves into another part of the organization. Is that right, Tosh? Like we usually do.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So we usually do.
But the right is to return to the same job. So they will come back to the job where you presumably got somebody else in, and then you can put them somewhere else. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly that. Because I often get employers saying, oh, no, I can't do that. Because we suggest a 9-month or 12-month contract, because it depends on how long that person's going to be off. But you also need a month to hand over on the way out to maternity, and you need some time to hand over on the way back from maternity. So don't forget to incorporate that into the role, into the length of the contract. And the other element I would say is really important is the role, and looking at the skill set and remembering you don't need to have like for like. There may just be an element of the role you want covered. There may be other elements that get divided amongst other people in the organization. And ultimately, it's having clarity on that so that whoever you're bringing in knows, your person who's going off on maternity knows what to hand over and to who. And you can stay on track with your strategic plan for your business. You know, sometimes I think employers...
Yes, absolutely.
So
I think it's also important to know, Mita, that holiday accrues during maternity leave.
Yes.
All your rights, only thing that doesn't stay the same as your pay. The pay is obviously different.
Yeah.
But all the other rights accrue. So you could effectively take it at the end of your maternity leave. If anything, probably the employer's got used to you not being there, so that might be a good time to extend it further, rather than you taking a ton of holiday in the following year, you know, because what you've accrued the year while you've been on maternity leave. So that there are more breathing space.
Yeah, some of my employees have come back officially, but then taken that first month as holiday because they then get paid for it, but they're still off, and that's all legal and okay to do.
Yeah, correct.
So it's a way of extending your paid maternity time without it costing you in terms of being off with no income. So
correct. Well, obviously, holiday will be full pay.
Yeah, exactly. What about in terms of if somebody is off and there's been a pay review while they've been off? How would an employer manage that?
They have to treat them exactly the same. So it depends what the circumstances are. If it's based on targets of an individual, then presumably that wouldn't be something you'd be looking at. If you're looking at a department-wide or a company-wide review, obviously that person's got to be included in that automatically. So the way to look at it is what would happen if she was there?
Yeah.
Then, you know, and if we're doing the same thing, make it, then that's fine.
Yeah, but you wouldn't do it whilst they're off. You would put it in place for when they're back, or the return to work conversation.
There's no reason you can't do it whilst they're off, because it might affect employees that are presently working there.
Okay, that's interesting. But it could be a choice.
Glitchy again, Amita, I'm afraid, for me.
Don't worry, we're working through it, Tosh, and I got some feedback on the chat group that actually people can see it fine, so it just might be your individual connectivity.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's...
So we have a question.
We're making it work so far, so let's keep going. I've got back now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a question from Louise who asks, if someone was on statutory sick pay, what would backdate the average weekly earnings? Would we use a different period of time for the maternity earnings?
No. If they've been on sick pay, you wouldn't base it on their sick pay. You base it on their normal salary, whatever their average earnings are. Generally speaking, say it would be a 13-week period before they went on maternity leave, right?
So she does need
maternity
pay.
But if they've been sick, you're not going to be based on sick pay.
No, understood. Tosh, you have a fan in the house. Hi, Olivia. And Olivia runs the maternity house, and you met at Firefly. Olivia's comment is that they find
right. Yes, of course.
So Olivia's comment is that they find people say that they feel their pregnancy is seen as an inconvenience. Do you know what? I think that is about emotional intelligence, and I think you're absolutely right. I put a little video out just before, which is that, you know, everything in life is a lesson or a blessing, right? But there's no bigger blessing than having a child. And as an employer, first thing when someone says they're having a child, it's got to be the human, wow, that's amazing, congratulations. You are going to be thinking about a million things in the back of your head, or employers are, but it's important to learn how to have the human conversation before you then have the professional conversation. And let's repackage it. You're so right. You've got some advice. So to combat this, with devising a way employers can add a maternity service to the existing wellbeing package so they feel they're valued in while they're still in post. Absolutely. And we guide, advise, and train our clients on this, which is, what language are you using? Not, oh God, now I'm going to have to hire someone and say, this is brilliant, I want to support you in this. So we've got a process that we discussed to go through. This is to make sure that you have complete understanding, clarity, and support whilst you're going through the process, and that the business can continue so that when you come back, everyone's flourishing. So these are all the things we're going to cover, and we want you involved in that. So absolutely, I love what I'm going to look you guys up.
I was about to say that Olivia will probably be a great conversation to have with you, Mita, because she's starting a new business specifically helping the maternity house. So I would certainly, Olivia, if you get in touch with Mita directly, or you've got my details, I think I'll put you in touch with her. I think it's definitely worth a chat, you two.
Brilliant. Now, listen, Tosh, I'm looking at the time, and we're about 3 minutes away from where we got 5 minutes because we started a little bit later. So let's talk the return to work process. This is the biggest scorer on the poll. And it's a yes, please. That's nice. We'll definitely connect, Olivia. The return to work process is the biggest score. That's where people find the biggest challenge. So let's assume, so setting the scene, somebody's pregnant, they've gone off to have the baby, they've got an enhanced maternity package, they've had all of their keep in touch days, and no one's actually had the conversation around what's the return to work date. They may have said, I want 9 months off, but now I want 10 months off, now I want 11 months off. At some point, the employer's got to be able to say, hey, can we talk about what returning to work looks like, right? Like, from when can an employer have that conversation?
Right at the start.
I love that. So long as it's supportive and collaborative. Yeah. Okay.
It's got to be that. And if they want to come back earlier, they have to give, the employees are required to give at least 8 weeks notice.
So that's a legal requirement that employees, we should make aware.
Correct. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's important because you will, as an employer, will have made allowances for them being off, which would be hiring other people, shifting roles. So if somebody wants to come back, you've got to unravel all of that or rethink how you'd support that.
Exactly right. Yeah. So you might have got cover in place. Well, then what happens? You've got to give that person notice and all those sorts of things. So you say you agree right at the beginning when they're due to come back. You put it in writing, so there's no doubt. You put it in writing about the keeping in touch days. You let them know what their rights are to come back to the same job. So now the issue is flexible working. So what the law says is any employee, I know we're talking about maternity today. Excuse me, a bit of frog in my throat. I know we're talking about maternity today, but any employee is entitled to make a flexible working request. Flexible working request means, how can I work differently than I'm working right now? That might be remotely. It might be reducing from full-time to part-time. It could be any manner of ways that you're working, a 13-day fortnight, for example. So whatever the flexible working request, you're entitled to make legally one a year, okay? And the employer then has to look at what that request is and determine whether they can accommodate that or not. Excuse me. There are reasons that an employer, so the first point shouldn't be looking at the reasons to refuse. The first bit should be, how can we make this work?
Yeah.
And you can always do it as a trial period, right? If you don't know, 4 weeks or what have you. So, reasons to refuse include inability to meet customer demand. So suppose the employee works 9 to 5 and they've decided they now want to work 5 to 9. And, the shop's shut. Well, that doesn't work, right? Maybe it's inability to reorganize the work. So we can't absorb the work within the existing workforce. Maybe it's inability to recruit. So I'm working 5 days a week. I now want to work 3 days a week. We can't get the 2-day-a-week person for that role, or the handover doesn't work effectively, or whatever real reasons exist. It might be planned structural changes. If you're going through a whole redundancy process, well, the last thing you want is people working less or changing their working processes because we're about to lose some people. So there's lots of different reasons that make it, there's 9 in total, in fact, that where they can reasonably refuse it. But it isn't a case of just putting a heading down, right? Inability to meet customer demand. Why? Why not? Let's have a think about it. From a practical point of view, one of my lawyers went on maternity leave and she reduced from 5 days a week to 3. My natural response was, but it's a full-time job. I don't know how we're going to do that. But then, but let's see. I said, but I also said, let's see how we make that work. I've got lots of challenges in my mind, but that's because I haven't done it the other way. So we tried it and we made it work, and it wasn't easy, but because we couldn't recruit a 2-day-a-week lawyer, because the nature of our work is it needs to be kind of seamless. We can't keep handing a job over. Clients wouldn't like it. But what we did do was figure out a system where when she wasn't in, her work was absorbed by the remaining staff, including myself, which we were happy to do. So it's a matter of, not thinking, oh, what can we do? Is how can we make it work? And then when you really think it through and you see why you can't, that's a better why you can't, the why reason we were talking about earlier, which will land better with the employee for sure. Otherwise, it just looks like you're trying to get out of it. The biggest lie employers ever told before COVID is you can't work from home. So, then they were forced to. And they were forced to think of different ways to make it work. So it's the same thing here. It's about being reasonable.
Everything you're saying is, while you've been talking, I've been thinking, because you're absolutely right about when people are off on maternity, that they want the flexible happens anyway, remote working, package 9 out of 10 days. There's so many varieties of hybrid working, flexible working, but there are actually other considerations for an employer as well. So that's the first thing. I love that you put it back to make your business case, be human, use emotional intelligence, but always make your business case, get your why very clear. I love the trial periods, but there's other elements as well of the return to work that I think can sometimes create barriers or facilitate collaboration. So I would do a return to work induction. I would do a return to work. Hey,
practical.
While you've been off, here's what's happened. I'm not assuming you know all of this. You might have kept in touch informally with people in the business. Brilliant. But I don't want to assume that you know it. I don't want to assume that you know it all, and I want to bring you up to speed, because these are all that. Because sometimes what happens is people come back in, then they're sitting there saying, "Oh, well, I didn't know that. I didn't," and all of a sudden they don't feel part of the team, and that can unravel the reintegration of the individual and the skills and the person and all that value you've put, and the maternity enhanced package all walks out the door. So really, be purposeful and deliberate on return to work inductions, telling people what's happened while they've been away, introduce them to new people who might not be new, they might have been there for a year, but really think about that, because it really does impact an individual. And retrain, recoach, have a couple of weeks in and say, right, you've got your feet back under the desk. Let's, almost do like a mini review. It doesn't need to be official. Say, how are you doing? What's working? What isn't? Are you still enjoying the things you did before? If not, why not? Do we need to upskill you? Do we need to spend more time? All of that stuff. And there's no right or wrong. I think it's absolutely key to make sure that people feel valued and stick in your organization. I'm just going to
everything you've said, Lisa. Everything you've said is common sense, isn't it? It's about being a decent human being. It makes sense. If somebody comes back from maternity leave, right, go back over there. You don't know any of the people around you. Just get on with it and introduce yourself. It doesn't work.
Well, there's just a lot of
so you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's assumptions, and I think sometimes we're busy, right? Everyone's busy. As Olivia said, employers sometimes act like they're being inconvenienced by people going off, and it's a very uncomfortable place for somebody off of maternity to be. So just taking deliberate steps to welcome back, you'll get a lot more loyalty, you'll get a lot more productivity and engagement, and ultimately you'll re-engage a fan and hopefully a long-term member of the team. Lou's mentioned, yes, they definitely get flexible working requests, but they also get questions on where can they go and nurse or breastfeed, or
she calls it beast feeding. I'm not sure what that is. It's the sort of beast mode of breastfeeding.
Potentially, but also engaging with new members. So there are so many elements, and I think just make a checklist. Have a checklist, run through it, and ask people, is there anything else? Like, I may be stating the bleeding bloody obvious, but I take nothing for granted, because even with all the best will in the world, sometimes things can get missed. So, Tosh.
Agreed. And the idea is have that grown-up conversation with that employee to know what's what needs to happen, any issues, any concerns, and who they can go to, because they're going to have other questions as they start getting back into work anyway, right?
Yeah. So I'm conscious we've gone over a bit today, but this is a meaty topic. There's a lot to cover here.
Yeah.
So thank you, Tosh. I'm going to wind it up. I'm going to say thank you to everyone. What a interactive chat room. They're the best kind. Thank you to everyone. Tosh, thank you for your insights and support on this. And Tosh is available out of hours. Obviously, this session Tosh does complimentary for us, our network and community, but Tosh is very much available just for a chat outside of these hours as well. You'll get his contact details, his LinkedIn when you get the recording, or please reach out. You've got my email and number, and we'd love to talk and support everyone in our community more in this maternity process.
Please, the help is there. Genuinely. So feel free to contact us. You know, if you don't know my firm's Astute Law, Google us, you'll get in touch with me directly. And if you've got other questions about these situations, let me know. Definitely. In the meantime, happy beast feeding, everybody. And we'll see you again next time.
I love it. Thank you, everyone. Tosh, amazing as always. And we'll see you all soon.
Bye everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.